Bully begins by introducing three school troublemakers, led by a student named Miles. The only reason they show up at school is to pick on other students they see as weak. One of their regular targets is a heavy-set boy named Jimmy Mulligan. Despite being bullied by Miles constantly, Jimmy never fights back. At school, Jimmy has two close friends, Andy and Bobby, who always support him. On top of that, Jimmy has loving and caring parents at home. One morning, while Jimmy and his friends are walking to school, they run into Miles and his gang. Miles demands $100 from Jimmy. That kind of money is way too much for someone like Jimmy, who comes from a modest family. Even after Jimmy tells him he doesn't have that kind of money, Miles doesn't care. He still pressures Jimmy to hand over $100. Miles doesn't just bully Jimmy. He also targets Bobby, mocking him for acting more feminine. After Miles humiliates Bobby in front of the class, Jimmy comforts him and tries to cheer him up. Later, Jimmy invites his friends to eat lunch at the cafeteria and even offers to pay. Andy and Bobby are surprised by how much food Jimmy can eat, but they never tease him about his appetite. After lunch, Andy and Bobby try to set Jimmy up with a girl at school named Adrian. They've noticed that Adrian often sneaks glances at Jimmy when they're eating in the cafeteria. Not long after that, Miles shows up and sits next to Jimmy, once again demanding the $100. One of the other students, annoyed by Miles causing trouble during lunch, tells him to leave and not start anything. Miles, feeling disrespected by someone he sees as weak, responds by yelling and insulting him with harsh words. But then, another student, bigger and tougher than Miles, steps in to put him in his place. Just like that, Miles loses his confidence and quickly walks out of the cafeteria without saying another word. After school, Miles corners Jimmy again and demands the money. Jimmy firmly says he doesn't owe Miles anything and refuses to give him a cent, hearing Jimmy push back. Miles snaps and starts beating him up on the side of the road. Miles only stops when an old man walks by and threatens to call the police. Scared, Miles quickly jumps into his car and speeds away. The old man helps Jimmy and brings him to his house to treat his wounds. He introduces himself as Mr. Action. While staying at Mr. Action's house, Jimmy learns that the old man used to be a world heavyweight boxing champion. Jimmy begs Mr. Action to train him so he can stand up to Miles and finally stop the bullying. Mr. Action wants to help, but he admits he's too old to coach Jimmy by himself. However, he promises to ask some of his old friends to help train him. Afterward, Mr. Action takes Jimmy home and tells his parents about the fight and what happened that day. Jimmy's parents are very grateful to Mr. Action for taking care of Jimmy and bringing him home safely. They immediately give Jimmy permission to start boxing training under Mr. Action's guidance. They even accompany him to the boxing gym owned by Manny. At the gym, Mr. Action explains Jimmy's situation to Manny. Manny agrees to help Jimmy, on one condition: Jimmy must take it seriously and never give up, because boxing training is tough. Once he agrees, Jimmy begins to train regularly with Manny, while Mr. Action closely watches his progress at every session. During one of the sessions, Jimmy tells Mr. Action about how Miles keeps forcing him to hand over $100. Mr. Action suggests that Jimmy should offer double, $200, but with the condition that Miles gives him 1 month to pay. Mr. Action's plan is for Jimmy to use that 1 month to prepare and defeat Miles when the time comes, so he won't actually have to give him anything. The next day, when Miles shows up to collect the money, Jimmy follows Mr. Action's advice. He tells Miles he'll give him $200, but only if he gets a full month. Miles thinks about it for a moment, since it's a long wait, but eventually agrees because of the bigger payoff. For a while, Jimmy is relieved that Miles is leaving him alone about the money. However, later that afternoon, during boxing practice, Jimmy looks sluggish and unmotivated. When Manny asks what's wrong, Jimmy says he feels tired. But Manny, with his experience, can tell that Jimmy isn't physically tired, he's mentally drained. Manny shares his concern with Mr. Action, saying that Jimmy no longer seems serious about training. On the way home, Mr. Action asks Jimmy why he seemed out of it during practice. Jimmy admits he's starting to feel worn down. He says that no matter how much he trains, it doesn't seem to make a difference. He still feels weak and powerless whenever Miles bullies him. Mr. Action, seeing Jimmy discouraged, tries to lift his spirits. He tells him that no effort ever goes to waste and that no matter what happens, he will learn something valuable from this journey. Later that evening, Jimmy's father also notices that he's losing interest in training. He doesn't push Jimmy to continue. Instead, he tells Jimmy the decision is his to make. But then he adds that one day, he hopes Jimmy can teach his own children how to defend themselves, so they won't have to go through the same things he has. Inspired by his father's words, Jimmy's fighting spirit comes back. He makes a promise to himself to take training seriously again. The next day, Miles and his gang once again intimidate Jimmy and his friends. They even go so far as to beat up Bobby in front of a crowd. Later, Jimmy finds Bobby sitting alone and crying. He goes over to comfort him, but Bobby feels hopeless and says there's nothing they can do against Miles and his gang. Jimmy disagrees. He tells Bobby that he has a plan to stop Miles and end the bullying once and for all. After school, Jimmy rushes home, grabs his bike, and rides all the way to Manny's boxing gym, even though he had always relied on Mr. Action to drive him because the gym is far. Mr. Action is thrilled to see Jimmy so excited about training again. In fact, Jimmy is so fired up that he accidentally lands a punch on Manny, knocking him down to the floor. Instead of being angry, Manny was thrilled to see Jimmy getting serious about boxing again. Long story short, day by day, Jimmy trained with strong determination and a fiery passion. Manny increased the intensity of his workouts, adding tougher physical exercises and some mixed martial arts. On the other hand, Mr. Action focused on building Jimmy's mental strength, always giving him advice and encouragement to inspire his fighting spirit. Meanwhile, at school, Jimmy told Andy about the boxing training he was going through in order to finally stand up to Miles. Around the same time, Adrian approached Jimmy, and the two started getting closer. They went to a party at a friend's house together. After having a deep, honest conversation, they realized how much they had in common and how well they connected. They decided to start dating. While they were out on a date, Eddie, one of Miles' guys, began to harass them by throwing insults. But this time, Jimmy, now more confident, stood up to Eddie and threw him out. Time went on, and eventually, the day came when Jimmy had to keep his promise to Miles. But Jimmy had already made up his mind. He was done being blackmailed and bullied. That morning, he woke up filled with confidence and determination. When he arrived at school, Miles approached him right away and threatened to hurt his friends if he broke his promise or tried to avoid the fight. Later, in the restroom, Jimmy met a student named Vinny who knew about his conflict with Miles. Vinny also knew Jimmy had been training at Manny's boxing gym and encouraged him, wishing him luck. What Jimmy and Vinny didn't know was that Eddie was hiding in one of the stalls and overheard everything. He went straight to Miles and told him what he had heard. Miles wanted to win easily, called in a known thug named Glassjaw Billy to fight in his place. The feud between Jimmy and Miles had now spread throughout the entire school. Everyone was excited to see the fight and find out who would come out on top. With confidence, Jimmy walked straight up to Miles and his gang. Miles, already aware that Jimmy wasn't going to pay him, planned to beat him down with the help of Glassjaw. However, Vinny was one step ahead. He sent some of his own guys to intercept and kidnap Glassjaw Billy. With no other option, Miles had to face Jimmy himself. The fight began. At first, Jimmy struggled to keep up with Miles, but he didn't give up. He got back up and started to fight back. Jimmy blocked Miles' punches and landed a clean, powerful blow to Miles' face. This was not the same chubby kid who used to let others walk all over him. Jimmy had changed. He could now defend himself, and he was ready to stand up for others who couldn't. Seeing that Miles was losing, his gang tried to jump in and help. But Andy and Bobby weren't going to let that happen. The two of them stepped in and fought beside Jimmy, and together they managed to defeat Miles and his gang. After winning the fight, Jimmy told Miles to stop bullying everyone at school. But Miles didn't seem to care. Meanwhile, Mr. Action had been watching everything from behind the crowd. He was incredibly proud of Jimmy. Even though Jimmy had become strong, he still had a good heart. Soon, the fight between Jimmy and Miles went viral after several students uploaded it to social media. It got so much attention that it was even covered by a local news channel. Jimmy's stand against bullying became a hot topic in the community. People everywhere praised Jimmy's courage to stand up to his bullies. His parents were proud too, proud that their son could now stand tall and defend himself. He wasn't a victim anymore. The film ends by showing Jimmy, Andy, Bobby, and Adrian walking confidently through the school, now admired and respected after their victory over the bullies who had terrorized so many students. Pushing someone around is easy, until one day they push back. That's why no one should ever bully someone else or think they're better than everyone, because everyone has their own strengths and their own weaknesses.